Tonight we're discussing the constitutional instrument on constituencies, the new constituencies which has been rejected by the Parliamentary Select Committee on Legislation. Now, the minorities' protest against the creation of some new 45 constituencies reaches smouldering heights as Subsidiary Legislation Committee outrightly rejects the CI, which seeks to give the EC legal backing to proceed. Now, what is not clear, however, is whether majority MPs on the committee are equally against the CI. The committee has recommended that Parliament as a whole, a bigger body, reject it for reasons of serious errors and untimeliness. Nevertheless, the document is a few days shy of maturing, 3 days actually, and it presents the House with very serious problems. Now, would it be rejected? These are questions we'll be asking. Are majority MPs in favor? What are the errors and how serious are they? And what happens if majority bulldozes its way through? What will be the implications for election 2012? We have the men to give you the answers. And you can stay tuned and post your comments on our Facebook wall, facebook.com/multi-TV express, or by text 1760 or on any of our platforms. Tonight I have with me in the studio Professor Kwesi Prempeh, who is a constitutional lawyer. Later on in the show, we'll go on the telephone line to speak to Ayikwe Otu, who is a former Attorney General and lawyer for the group which is suing the Electoral Commission over the creation of these new constituencies. Welcome to PM Express, sir.
Thank you. Thanks for having me back.
We're back again to this same problem we started discussing a few weeks back. Now, what does it look like 3 days before the maturity date? The Select Committee has rejected the CI. What's the way forward?
Well, I guess the Constitution, of course, gives Parliament up to 21 days to make up its mind when an instrument, a constitutional instrument of this nature, is laid before it. And so, of course, it's within its time frame for making a decision. But the decision is a decision to be made by Parliament itself, not by the subcommittee. So the subcommittee is just, the Committee of Parliament is just for Parliament's own internal governance. It decides to divide up its work into committees and then decides that on this particular issue, the Subsidiary Legislation Committee will take it up in committee. So it has to come back to the full House, and the full House then has to make up its mind. Now, it's a bit tricky because when you delegate or when you assign a task to a committee, you assign it because you think that a committee is a much smaller body. It has a lot more expertise, presumably, and therefore can focus narrowly on the issue and bring a lot more specialization and expertise to bear on considerations of those issues. So when that committee comes back to advise you one way or the other, oftentimes there's at least a certain presumption, right, that the full body would act in accordance with the advice of that committee, presumably because they believe that the committee can do a better, more focused, more in-depth job that they gave the job to the committee in the first place. So this is a situation where a committee has done the work, it's advising the full body one way or the other, and we're not sure whether or not the full body is going to go along with the committee's recommendation, primarily because this is actually a very hot political football, right? And so there are political and, for that matter, partisan consequences to going one way or the other. We're talking about electoral boundaries, and these essentially determine control of Parliament, right? So it's really an interesting issue we're faced with here. But the difficulty also, I think, Parliament has that even in this particular case, the advantage always is with the Electoral Commission, right? Because under the Constitution, under Article 11, Article 11, Clause 7, if Parliament chooses to annul or chooses to invalidate the instrument, it has to do it by a supermajority, right? So it's not really that easy to come up with a supermajority in a circumstance like this. So it appears, I mean, if I were hazarding a guess, as to exactly what the outcome of this would be like. It appears that the Electoral Commission has, at least constitutionally speaking, appears to have the momentum in its favor.
So what happens if Parliament is not able to actively deliberate on it and 21 days elapses?
Well, then we follow the letter of the Constitution.
Then we go with the errors and untimeliness that were stated in the
that's the
legislative
price you pay.
report.
The process is exhausted at that point. The Constitution gives you a certain process, and once the process has run its course, regardless of what it is that is left undone, the process has run its course. So yes, if indeed the subcommittee's thinking is that this must be rejected or withdrawn because there are errors in it, or that it fails to meet certain criteria, still, if Parliament fails to act decisively within the constitutional time limit, the Electoral Commission's instrument is good law.
Well, we're joined on the line now by Albert Abongo, who is a member of the Subsidiary Legislation Committee of Parliament. Good evening, sir, and thanks for your time. Hello, good evening, Mr. Albert Abongo, and thanks for your time, sir. Good evening, sir. If you can hear me, I'm welcoming you to the show. Well, I think we have difficulty in hearing.
Hello?
Yeah, good evening, sir, if you can hear me.
Hello?
Good evening, and thanks for joining us on PM Express.
Yes, I must say that your background commentary has been very faint. I have hardly heard you.
Right, but can you hear me now?
Yes, I'm hearing you, but I realized you were running a commentary on this subsidiary legislation, the LI that is before Parliament now for consideration.
Right, that's right.
But I wasn't hearing your comments on it at all.
Right, I was actually setting the stage for discussing this issue. So if you can hear me, it's all right. We can just go ahead and discuss. The committee of which you are a member has recommended that has actually totally rejected the constitutional instrument 73 also that was brought before Parliament. Can you walk us through the actual reasons why this decision was taken?
Well, let me make it clear that as if there is any report before Parliament that says that committee agreed for annulment of that LI, I must say that was not a decision arrived at the committee level. When I saw the report laid in Parliament, I was with a view that the leadership of both sides in the committee had sat down and considered the issues that were discussed at the committee level, and probably came to the conclusion that there was a need to withdraw or annul the LI. But then subsequent inquiries from my colleagues who are leaders in the committee gave indication that no, there was no consultation. That report in the first place was not discussed at the committee level. Before a report is submitted to the House, the draft report would have been discussed at the committee level. And if that was not the case, at least it would have been discussed with the leadership for us to come up with a common sense of what we should be submitting to the House. But apparently this does not take place at all. And so when it came up that the report was stating that the recommendation of the committee was that the LI should be annulled, we were all shocked about it. And so it comes as a surprise, particularly to members of the majority.
So let me clarify this. Let's get it straight before we go on. So what you're saying is that the committee in general did not arrive at the decision to annul or withdraw the CI. So how did that end up in the report then?
Hello?
How did that end up in the report which was submitted?
That is what is the case now, because the last time the committee sat, was at the Electoral Commission. And in actual fact, I was not at that meeting. But what I'm saying is that whatever might have occurred at that meeting, and when drafting the final report, of course, one would have required that final report would have been discussed by the whole committee so that we all can agree that in view of certain lapses in the LI, there was a need to withdraw. But that never occurred. And so when some of us saw it, we said, oh, but when did we arrive at this? We all realized that indeed there were some minor errors. Most of them were typographical. And so what would have been the basis for the committee recommending the whole LI to be annulled? So it came as a shock.
Right.
But then, well, what I can say is that this has been referred back to the committee for discussion, and we just hope that the leadership of the committee will call all of us tomorrow.
But do we have
it before it is laid for us to take a common decision before it is laid back in the House?
But do we have enough time for the committee to sit again, seeing that we have barely 3 days for the CI to mature?
Yes, we have enough time. We have enough time to sit for us to be convinced by the chairman of the committee who signed the report to say that, well, in view of these lapses or whatever, there was the need for the whole LI to be annulled. And I mean, he needs to convince us because we all are shocked about the decision taken by the chairman, apparently, in signing for the whole LI to be annulled.
So what's going to be the position of both the minority and majority in this when it's the CI comes before Parliament on Wednesday?
Not at this stage want to say that this will be the majority decision or it will be the minority decision on the LI. The committee is expected to reconvene because it was referred back to the committee to ensure that things are quickly done. And so when we meet tomorrow, we just hope that we can do the right thing and ensure that the right decision that reflects the views of the whole committee is presented before the House.
But in your opinion, you think that the CI that was laid before Parliament is actually okay, apart from a few typo errors, right? I'm asking whether you are of the view that the constitutional instrument that was placed before Parliament is actually okay, except for a few typo errors.
Oh, yes, I think that it is okay. It is okay. Just that when you are dealing with a voluminous document of that nature, one would expect that there will be some omissions and there will be minor typographical errors that will need to be straightened up. And I think that when we were considering it, the Electoral Commission sat in throughout and took notice of all those errors that we indicated in the LI. And so, and the CI. And so there shouldn't be a problem with Electoral Commission quickly making those corrections and ensuring that things are done properly. So if we don't do it that well, it only means that as a House, we want to frustrate the work of the Electoral Commission. And I think that constitutionally, they have a duty to perform for this country. And we should be seen as a House facilitating that process. And so Parliament should not be seen as working in a manner that will frustrate the Electoral Commission. You know, at the critical stage of organizing a whole national elections. And so if we see small errors in their submission and we think that we should make it difficult for them to do their work, I think that will not be proper way to go at all.
So a quick one, a yes or no. Do you envisage that on Wednesday when the new revised CI is placed before Parliament, it will be approved?
The new CI as laid by the EC?
I'm asking whether you envisage that by Wednesday...
No, I think that we should approve it as Parliament for them to go ahead and do their work. And if there are any corrections that have to be made, they will proceed to ensure that those are done.
Thank you very much. I'll have you stay on. We'll come back into the studio, and this comes to me as a surprise. I guess to you as a surprise also.
Absolutely.
How will the committee sit? I mean, legislative committee, and come up with a report which other members say they're surprised with? How could this happen?
It beats me. I mean, it's really raises questions about the nature of the process that actually, in terms of the organization of parliamentary business at the committee level, it raises questions about the process that's going on there. Because if a member can come and say, well, I'm surprised that this is the report that's come out of the committee, and even to suggest that probably it was just authored by the chairman. I mean, the chairman of a committee doesn't author a committee's report by himself or herself.
This raises serious questions about the integrity of the whole committee.
So I'm a bit disturbed by that. I mean, I'm really quite disturbed by what I'm hearing from the member of parliament and member of the committee, because this is not how committee business must be conducted. So it does raise questions in my mind, because when you read the report, at least as reported in the media, the errors that are being referred to are not typographical. They're talking about errors about significant portions of certain voting populations being left out of whole constituencies or electoral areas. And then to hear that, oh, these are just typos. I think I also ought to disagree with the honorable member, when he suggests that the role of Parliament in this exercise is to facilitate the work of the Electoral Commission. I think the role of Parliament is neither to facilitate nor obstruct, but to review, to do some due diligence, right? I mean, the Constitution requires these constitutional bodies and others who exercise constitutional powers, when they exercise things that have the effect of law, to pass them through Parliament for a reason. It is not so Parliament can rubber stamp them or ignore errors and say, well, let's just let them go so we can deal with the errors later. If indeed he concedes that there are errors, I think it would be inappropriate for Parliament to just say, well, we shouldn't frustrate Parliament's work, Electoral Commission's work, so let's just go ahead, rubber
get
stamp
it on with.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that trivializes the constitutional role of Parliament and reduces it to a rubber stamp. That's not what Parliament is there to do. It is there to actually review this, do a good faith review, scrutinize it, and to ensure that, it checks. Parliament must have a checklist. It checks all the boxes and is correct. But to say that we are there to facilitate,
that's not too good.
I don't think, and I think that there's a certain sense and even a certain history here. When you go back to even our experience in 1979 under the Constitution at the time, there were two occasions when Parliament disagreed with the decision of the President, one with an appointment to the Supreme Court and then with the President's budget. They voted against those. And then the interpretation that we gave to it was that, Parliament is frustrating the work of the President. As if Parliament exists to just basically expedite the work of the President. No, Parliament exists as a check and a balance. And so this idea that whenever Parliament says no to some constitutional body or some constitutional power, that Parliament has done something untoward or improper, I think it's something that we need to really take out of our mind.
Right, we'll go back onto the telephone lines now and speak to Ayikwe Otu, who is former Attorney General, and he's the lawyer who is representing the group suing EC over the creation of these new constituencies. Thank you very much, sir, for your time. Good evening, sir, and thanks for your time on PM Express. Good evening, sir, and thanks for your time on PM Express. Right, I think we don't have Ayikwe Otu. So, I mean, the thing is that it does appear that we are at a crossroad. So, considering all the reasons that Honorable Albert Abongo has espoused, do you think we're making progress in doing due diligence to this CI that was placed before the Subsidiary Legislation Committee?
Well, I think the Electoral Commission has a really tough job. I mean, and the Electoral Commission, to its credit, has definitely earned a lot of praise, and I think appropriately so, for the integrity with which it has handled our election administration generally. In this particular matter of boundary demarcation or constituency creation, I think the Electoral Commission, unfortunately, has found itself in the position in which it is by virtue of having gotten itself bound up with certain rules and certain readings of the law that I think are problematic. There are multiple reasons for saying that. One, I think, is the very idea, right, that whenever we
have our equal to back on the line, Prof. We'll take him. Good evening, sir, and thanks for joining us on PM Express.
Hello, sir. I can hear you.
It does appear that we are at a crossroad. Is that what you describe it, considering that you have a case in court pending against the creation of these new constituencies and the subsidiary legislation committee recommending that this CI be annulled? Now we spoke to a member of the committee who says this report comes as a surprise. How do you feel about all of these processes, especially considering that in 3 days' time, the CI will be matured if Parliament fails to take any decision on it?
Well, thank you. I listened to Honorable Member Abungo, and it seems to me that it does not appear to be abreast with what is happening at his own committee. He talks about LI when in fact we are talking about a CI. I agree with Dr. Prempeh that the issue is not rubber stamping. The issue is if there are errors, who has power to effect amendments? It seems to me that Parliament is not making use of the Constitution and the judicial interpretation that certain articles and clauses of the Constitution has received by the Supreme Court. Article 297 of the Constitution, Clause D, provides that where a power is conferred to make any constitutional or statutory instrument, regulation, or rule, or pass any resolution or give any direction, the power shall be construed as including the power exercisable in the same manner to amend or to revoke the constitutional or statutory instruments, regulation, rules of resolution, or direction as the case may be. This has received an interpretation by the Supreme Court in the case of Stephen Nibote Okane versus the Electoral Commission and the Attorney General, in which the Supreme Court held that Parliament has no power to amend any subsidiary legislation. If the makers of that law, by the provisions of 297D, think that there is a need for amendment, they should go and withdraw it from Parliament. Parliament's clearance duty can be found in Article 11.7, which only calls for annulment and nothing more. It shall come into force at the expiration of 21 sitting days after being so late, unless Parliament, before the expiration of 21 days, annuls the order, rule, or regulation by the vote of no less than 2/3 of all the members of Parliament. The power given to Parliament to amend. Now, I'm saying that Honorable Abungo appears not to be abreast with what is happening at his committee, because the EC itself had written a letter to the Commission complaining about the errors and asking them to rather and asking them to carry out the amendments. Parliament is saying we don't have that power to amend. That is why the recommendation is being made that in those circumstances, let us rather annul under 11.7. Now, if they dare go ahead, we'll have to take the matter back to the Supreme Court to say that CI was never passed in accordance with the Constitution.
So, sir, what legal options are available to you in the event that this goes through? I mean, considering that it's 3 days more, what legal options would you have?
Yeah, the option is this. The man who brought it, the EC, that laid the constitutional instrument, has told Parliament in the letter, I don't know whether he's not seen the letter, that there are so many errors that they are rather asking Parliament to effect the amendments before the CI can go through. Now, Parliament is saying we do not have that power. That is what the Constitutional Committee, the Committee on Subsidiary Legislation, is talking about. We don't have that power. The only way is one-way traffic we either annul or allow it to pass. In view of the errors, please let us annul. He said there is no consensus on that. I don't understand why. In view of the position of UC, he is the maker of that instrument. He is saying that there are errors. He is saying effect amendments for me. Sometimes they say, no, I cannot do that. If they go on, it means that that law would have been passed contrary to the provisions of the Constitution, and the Supreme Court, when we get there, will strike it down.
Thank you very much, Ms. Ayikwe. We'll come back to you later on. We'll get back to the discussion in the studio. It's getting warmed up in this debate. There are issues that are being raised, reference 117 and 297, as Ayikwe raised. Walk us through some of these constitutional legalities.
In fact, I think that I owe it to the Honorable former Attorney General, the provision that he just mentioned, just listening to him without really having given this any serious previous thought, I think it sounds to me eminently reasonable, a reading of the applicable provisions. 11 clause 7 definitely does only mention annulment, right? That when the instrument is placed before Parliament, before the expiration period is over, Parliament can annul it. If it doesn't annul it after the expiration period is exhausted, then it goes into effect as law. So it appears to me from the reading that he just, his own reading, that in fact the Constitution contemplates only an annulment and nothing else.
And nothing else, yeah.
So it appears to be quite a reasonable reading. I'm saying this as someone who really hasn't thought through this in any exhaustive manner, but it does appear to me to be a very reasonable reading. And again, so what the EC is saying, if Ayikwe version is to be taken as fact, then would be to essentially say, well, we've discovered, we agree with you that there are errors here, so give us the opportunity. But the EC is then saying, fix the errors for us and pass it.
Which is not possible.
Which
by
I think by his reading, Parliament would be doing something improper if it did that. So all you then have to do is just refer it back, annul it, give it back to the Electoral Commission. The Electoral Commission fixes the errors and then lays it back again. There's nothing wrong with doing that. The Electoral Commission can have another bite at the apple and just put it back there and say, well, errors fixed. So why don't you take a look at it again? And I think if that were done, I guess we still have some time. We still have some time to
at least
to
up to
work.
Wednesday to get that work. Well,
let's beyond Wednesday. I mean, then it means that we start the whole process again.
So
That's
that
right.
the EC has to bring the CI
Another
again and
21
then another
days.
21
That's
days.
correct.
That will affect the time that Parliament will be rising. I mean, Parliament's rising was rescheduled 2 weeks away to accommodate this.
If the errors are not fatal, if the errors are not really that significant as Honorable Abongo was suggesting, then it would appear to me that instead of just spending time haggling over this issue, the EC can just withdraw it and quickly fix the errors and lay them back, even within this matter of 3 days that we have. So rather than just haggle about this matter and try and figure out whether it's significant or a typo and all of that, why are we just wasting time? If it's so easily fixable, then why don't you
should fix it.
And
Right.
lay it back?
Let's take a listen to a previous interview we had with the Electoral Commission's Osu Pare.
Yes, we've been told that there are a few mistakes in the instrument, and so we've been discussing with the Parliamentary Subcommittee on Subsidiary Legislation, and that is what we are doing now. So, insofar as I am concerned, the instrument has been laid before Parliament, and that is what is required to be done before it becomes law. Well, the law says that it must lie there for 21 sittings, and that means that when it is not withdrawn and it lies there for 21 days, it passes. So far we've not been told to withdraw any document from Parliament. So as far as we are concerned, it's been laid properly and the days are counting.
Well, the days are counting, you heard him say. It does appear that the EC is waiting for the days to go counting in their favor.
Well, there's an incentive for the EC to take that approach, because the annulment, if it is to take place, has to be done, as we read in 11.7, by not less, right? It comes into force at the expiration of 21 sitting days after being so laid, unless Parliament, before the expiration of the 21 days, annuls the order, rule or regulation by the votes of not less than 2/3 of all the members of Parliament. So because of that hurdle, right, because whoever proposes to annul it must be able to gather at least 2/3 of the members, all members of Parliament. So the advantage, of course, is in favor of Parliament. So, I mean, it's in favor of the Electoral Commission, sorry. The Electoral Commission can just sit and wait and say, well, Parliament is not going to get 2/3. And therefore, at the end of the 21 days, errors or no errors, we get our CI passed, right, becoming law by default, right? So I can see why the Electoral Commission, if it is very sensitive about its own timetable and it's looking only to its timetable, will just sit back and say, hey, there's enough dissension in Parliament, nobody's going to get 2/3 of the votes, and therefore we'll sail through.
Well, you're watching PM Express. You can send us your comment on Facebook, facebook.com PM Express, and by text 1760. My name is Stephen Enti, and I have with me Professor Kwesi Prempeh. We're discussing the issues surrounding Constitutional Instrument 73 that was placed before Parliament to give EC, the Electoral Commission, a mandate to proceed to create 45 new constituencies. We're discussing the constitutional instrument on the creation of 45 new constituencies. I have in the studio Professor Kwesi Prempeh, who is a constitutional lawyer. He prefers to be called a constitutional analyst. And then we still have on the telephone line Ayikwe Otu, who is former Attorney General and lawyer for a group which is suing the Electoral Commission over the creation of new constituencies. I guess we should go back to Ayikwe Otu. Good evening, sir, and thanks for staying there with us.
Thank you.
Now, I did mention that as it stands, in view of the reasons which your group, the group which sued Electoral Commission, raised, if the EC goes ahead with the unrevised constitutional instrument and then Parliament is unable to sit on it and it matures, what would that mean in real terms? What would that mean, and how will you approach it in view of your previous case at the Supreme Court?
Well, first of all, let's put it in perspective. Article 2.1 of the Constitution makes it clear that the Constitution is the supreme law of the land. So any person who alleges that an enactment or anything contained in or done under the authority of that or any other enactment or any act or omission of any person is inconsistent with or is in contravention of the provisions of this Constitution, they bring an action in the Supreme Court for a declaration to that effect. So merely passing the law does not end it. If we are satisfied and we can demonstrate that the law has been passed but was done in contravention of the Constitution, then we can go under Article 20, the combined effect of Article 20 and 130 of the Constitution, and ask for both interpretation and enforcement, and ask it to be struck down. I had mentioned the case of Stephen Nimboti Okane, in which certain aspects of LI 1853, I believe, were struck down. It again happened in the Premier, where about 24 electoral areas were also struck down. It has happened recently in the Netitriku, this Romania Akusa case, where the decision to place certain electoral areas under the Greater Accra of Eastern Region was also struck down. It has also happened in Nana Akuta, where the capital of Tredia was changed by Parliament from Pauma Chimakoma was changed from Tredia to Fuasi, was also struck down. So there is a lot of precedent, in before the Supreme Court, which we can appeal to assist us to come to this conclusion. Again, Article 51 is very clear that the EC can only work by publishing constitutional instruments. The Electoral Commission shall, by constitutional instrument, make regulations for the effective performance of its functions under this Constitution. These constitutional instruments can only be made in accordance with Article 11.7. So if they are not made in accordance with Article 11.7, as I've already pointed out, they themselves have come to see that they have committed errors, or they are errors, and they are now asking Parliament to make that amendment for them, which Parliament has no power to do. Then the only option left is to have this thing annulled. If they fail to annul it, as I'm saying to you, we'll go under the combined effects of 2:1 and 130 and ask the Supreme Court to declare this thing unconstitutional. In view of the letter from the Electoral Commission itself, we would base our case on that one and go to court, that they had no power to amend anything, and if therefore they could not amend, then the only option left was the recommendation made by the Constitutional Legislation Committee. And so to have, as it was, showed contempt to that committee and bulldoze their way at the majority, they should know that we are in the constitutional era, and merely passing a law does not mean that that law can be implemented. The Supreme Court can strike it down.
Thank you very much, sir, for your time. Ayukwe Otu is former Attorney General. He has raised volumes of issues surrounding the legal options available to them. I mean, I know without the benefits of this case law and references he made, we might not be able to go into detail about on the legalities of striking down this law if EC goes ahead and Parliament approves it.
Well, I'm not so sure that a defect in the process, right? It depends on the grounds on which he attacks the law after the fact. So assuming that the process goes through, the law is not annulled or amended, and therefore it expires upon the expiration of 21 days, either because they couldn't garner the two-thirds majority to annul it, and becomes law. Of course, you can still attack it, right? Every law can be attacked, whether it's an act of parliament or an LI or a CI. But if the grounds on which you are attacking it is that parliament, the process within the committee and parliament and all of that were flawed, I am not so sure that those are grounds that would easily win you the day in court, because even in our current constitutional system, the courts still do apply some principles, right? One of the cardinal principles about separation of powers is that the various branches of government, when it comes to their internal governance and how they are organized to do business, that matter is within their own purview, right? So usually the court would not enter into Parliament and begin to micromanage how Parliament does its business, right? The court would normally wait for Parliament to be done with its business, and when the output is there and it's in the form of a law or an act or an LI, the court would then say, well, on some substantive grounds, this law is defective. This law is defective because it violates this provision of the Constitution, this right, that one. But for the court to actually, as it were, intrude into Parliament and begin to say, oh, you should have voted this way instead of that way. You should not have allowed this particular provision here. You should have annulled it instead of that. I don't think that
that is not expected to happen.
That the court would be very, very, very cautious before taking that position. And in fact, there is also case law to that effect. The difficulty is that within Ghanaian constitutional case law, there are those there are decisions on both sides. There are those who take the view that almost everything is reviewable by the court, right? And yet there are decisions to suggest that what is sometimes called the political question doctrine, that there are certain things that certain branches of government will do that are purely within their purview, that only they can do. Those who take the position would have difficulty with this argument that if Parliament does not annul it, that is alone grounds for attacking it. It could be attacked on some other grounds.
But do you foresee problems of any kind, seeing that we have barely 4 months to general elections and these issues are going back and forth?
Yeah,
is this healthy?
It is to be expected as elections become hotly contested. These issues of constituency demarcation and others would begin to really become deeply contested as well. And that's why the point I was making is that somehow, in my view, the Electoral Commission's work is difficult as it is already. It did not have to compound its work by the way in which I think it has bound itself by certain rules. One of the things that is going on here is the Electoral Commission takes the view that it is required by legislation to essentially assign a constituency to every district that is created.
Which is one of the arguments CDD has made in its presentation.
That is a very big problem, right? Because under the Constitution, the creation of districts is within the purview of the president, right? A political office holder. The creation of constituencies, however, the framers of the Constitution, in their wisdom, decided that creation of constituencies, however, must be done by an independent electoral commission. The distinction is important. Districts are essentially branch offices of the central government. The president presides over that central government administration. So whenever they determine that for the efficient governance of the country from the center, they need this number of districts, usually the Constitution doesn't appear to stand in their way. You can do it. Constituencies are not branch offices of the central government. Constituencies are political subdivisions, right, of the polity, of the population as a whole, and it does the reverse thing that the districts do. The districts are there for the center to get representation at the local. Constituencies are there for the locals to get the voice at the center. There's no reason why we should take the view, or that the EC should take the view, that whenever you have a district, you have to have a constituency. In fact, the law to do that is for the EC to surrender its independent constitutional function to the president. And that, in fact, is what Article 46 of the Constitution does not want to happen, because it says the EC, in doing its work, must not subject itself to the direction or control of any other body.
No,
but when you do that, you immediately create the situation where presidents then determine what kinds of where we're going to have a constituency. They can have their districts. It shouldn't entitle them to constituency.
Now, the Center for Democratic Development, in its submission to the Subsidiary Legislation Committee, among other things, said that there is a subtle perception that the EC is favouring the ruling NDC in creating the new constituencies. Do you think the EC is putting itself in a position to raise these perceptions about it? I
didn't see the CDD's submission to the committee, or if there was one. I know that CDD, various scholars and other persons have written about this in CDD's publications. The position CDD takes is this, that mall apportionment, and we call this is a term of art, to refer to this practice where different constituencies have vastly different populations. The basic rule in the Constitution under Article 47 and Article 47(3), the basic rule the EC is supposed to apply is that the boundaries of each constituency shall be such that the number of inhabitants in the constituency, it says, is as nearly as possible equal to the population quota. The population quota is the figure, roughly the figure that you get when you divide up the whole country by the number of constituencies. And basically, what it is saying is that every constituency must have roughly the same population. The logic of that is that MPs, when they go into parliament, represent people, right? They stay in parliament to give voice to the people in their local areas at the center. And therefore, you do not want a certain community of citizens to have a smaller voice or a louder voice than the others. All Ghanaians grouped together in various communities called constituencies must have roughly the same weight when it comes to making decisions at the central or national level.
Now, there is also the argument that government or the state in general does not have the resources for additional MPs and additional constituencies.
Well,
seeing that the existing 230 don't even have offices.
There is that argument. I can understand
really.
The Electoral Commission's point that, look, we follow the Constitution, right? And that reasons of economy, convenience, if the Constitution requires that we do X, we'll do X regardless of the cost. If you don't want us to do X, change the Constitution. On this issue, however, I think the Electoral Commission's problem is one of its own creation, which is that the Constitution actually does not require the Electoral Commission
to review upwards,
keep increasing the number. It merely requires it to alter the boundaries, right? And the Electoral Commission's reading of that provision to mean that whenever the population of the country has shot up by virtue of a census that we conducted,
there should be new constituencies.
That somehow we are obligated to increase the number, I think is definitely erroneous, right? And that's partly what gets it into this bind. There are many, many situations where populations change and yet you do not increase the numbers. In fact, under the 57 Constitution and the 69 Constitution of Ghana, we had upper limits on the size of parliament. I think one reason why the Electoral Commission feels emboldened to make this argument is that under the current Constitution, we do not have an upper limit on the size. We only have a minimum number. So the Electoral Commission takes the position, if the Constitution wanted to constrain us to a certain number, they would have put a cap on the size of parliament. But the mere absence of a cap doesn't mean that you are constitutionally required, right, or even permitted, actually, to continue to increase the numbers. I think that in this particular instance, the Electoral Commission's reading, the way in which it has applied its constitutional mandate, has actually partly helped to create this problem, right? Because constantly increasing the numbers is going to get us into this problem.
Right. I have a couple of messages from you, our cherished audience. Kasim Tewia says that I want to know if the country is financially sound to support these new MPs. Moreover, can the already congested Parliament House host these new MPs? And Abdullah Ambitious Rahman, you say that if there is any violence during December elections, we should blame the Electoral Commission and the majority members of Parliament for their actions. Is a recipe for anarchy and chaos. And Amwatin Kusikweku says this Afarijan man is very stubborn. And Mami Araba Otin says anyway, anyhow, it is still Ghana first. That is true, Ghana first in all of these. Isaac K. Signal says creating a new constituency shouldn't be a problem because it will help the people of that area to also get adequate share in terms of development and other things. Adumako Job says that Ghana, everything we complain. I believe our way of showing that we are okay is to complain. How on earth will one constituency serve two districts? Excuse me, Electoral Commission. That's from Adumako Job. And Dixon Desire from Laura, you say that, can the government publish how much it's spent on an MP per month? I'm just imagining the cost burden on these extra MPs that are to be elected. If I may ask, will the MPs agree if their salaries and emoluments be slashed to enable government cater for the extra MPs to be elected? If the CI is passed. Susanna Mauli, you're also saying that those of us in Aplau are happy the Committee on Subsidiary Legislation is rejecting the constitutional instrument on the new assemblies. She describes them as assemblies, but they are new constituencies. We do not understand why Akachi, with the population of less than 80,000, will be split, while Ketu South, with over 200,000 people, cannot have a split. These are some of the issues that have come forward in the arguments that people
and I think some of them raise really germane questions. I mean, these are really, I mean, on the cost argument, I'm sure that the rebuttal would be, and we hear this all the time, democracy is not cheap. True, democracy is not cheap. However, we should not make it needlessly expensive. Right? The mere fact that it's not cheap doesn't mean that we could continue to pile on the cost when in fact those additional costs are avoidable. And I think this is one instance where the additional cost of creating these new constituencies in terms of the cost to parliamentary operations, the cost in terms of maintaining each MP and the like is actually needless because it is not constitutionally compelled. There is no constitutional reason in the document, in the letter of the Constitution that
the Electoral Commission should be reviewing.
The Electoral Commission is allowed to take account of certain factors. It is allowed to take account. That is different from saying that, well, because we are allowed to take account of the fact that there's a district here, we are going to make it a rule that every district must get a constituency. Somebody raised the question about, well, there's nothing wrong with creating more constituencies because then everybody will get a share of the so-called national cake. Well, if you are concerned about national cake being shared, actually the appropriate vehicle for doing that is through districts. That's what the central government does, not through constituencies. We do not use constituencies, at least within the Constitution. The function of constituencies is not for national cake sharing. It's for giving voice to the local people and local communities at the center in Accra. Districts do the opposite. It gives representation to the central government at the local level. They serve different functions. One is to facilitate the governance of the country administratively by the center. The other is to make sure that people from all parts of the country have a voice and a say-so in the making of laws that govern this country. Those are two different things.
And say so in the making of decisions that govern the country. I'll take a few more of your messages and then we're out of here. Abdul Razak, Pakman, Mohammed, you say, I think they're late for this is waste of resources if it will be in their own interest if they do that after the election. He says it will be in their own interest if they do that after the elections. Stephen Laurie says, we're watching them. Emmanuel Redu Arthur says, the creation of these new constituencies are there to help the Mahama administration to continue the Better Ghana agenda of the late professor. So let all come on board. Matilda Abrakwa is saying that it's, she's asking if Multi TV is recruiting. You can send your CV. Asana Razak says, but as it may, the minority will always have its say, but the majority shall have its way. Minority shall have its say, but the majority shall have its way. Isaac Signal again says, creating the constituencies will help those constituents get what they want as Ghanaians. Yeboah Kennedy, the new constituency for what? Does Ghana have enough resources to create these new constituencies while we have less than 4 months to elections? Those are very crucial questions. Now, how many parliamentary seats does the developed countries have? That is in comparison to Britain or any of the other countries. I'm disgusted about the lack of due diligence surrounding the issue. The response of the parliamentary committee is appalling, to say the least. This is from Fred. And George Sibris Ponue says the CI should be rejected totally. In Volta region, districts and constituencies were created to satisfy senior government officials in the region. All the following got new constituencies: Sena Dansoa, Juliana Zuma, Doa Jaho, Ameno Wude, and Beba Kumensa. Well, these are allegations we cannot independently verify. And finally, Anguna Bala John says MPP should stop making noise. If it was their term of office, they will go ahead to create these new constituencies. Thank you very much for sending these messages, and thank you, Sir Professor Kwesi Prempeh, for joining us on the show.